Marcus Thunderheart's weathered hands froze around his morning coffee cup, the steam rising between his fingers like prayers he'd stopped believing in. There, pressed against the frost-covered glass of his cabin door, were bloody paw prints, small, desperate, leading directly to his threshold. The blue eyes staring back at him through the window weren't human. A wolf pup, no bigger than a house cat, collapsed onto his wooden porch with a soft thud that echoed through the morning silence. Something metallic glinted between its tiny jaws, something that made Marcus's heart stop beating for 3 full seconds. His daughter Emma's hospital bracelet, the one buried with her 3 years ago. The coffee cup shattered against the floor, hot liquid spreading like spilled blood across the worn planks. His hands trembled as memories flooded back. Emma's last words, her final wish for a wolf sister to protect Daddy when I'm gone. "This isn't possible," he whispered, but his feet were already moving toward the door. What had brought this creature to him, and why did it carry a piece of his dead daughter? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Thunderheart had once been a man who believed in explanations. At 52, his graying braids framed a face carved by loss, each line a testament to the 3 years since his world collapsed. The cabin around him stood as a monument to better times. Emma's crayon drawing still taped to the refrigerator, Sarah's reading glasses still folded on the kitchen counter, as if waiting for her return from a trip that would never end. The Lakota blood that flowed through his veins came from his grandmother, who used to tell stories about spirit wolves with eyes like winter sky. He'd dismissed those tales as folklore during his tenure as a Stanford wildlife biology professor, back when he had tenure, respect, and a family to come home to. Now, surrounded by the ghosts of his former life, those ancient stories felt less like myth and more like prophecy. The foreclosure notice crumpled on his desk served as a daily reminder of his financial reality. $47,000 in debt, with 30 days to pay or lose the last connection to his ancestors' land. The bottle of whiskey beside it had become his most faithful companion, helping him sleep through the crushing weight of survivor's guilt that pressed against his chest every morning. Sarah had died first. Cancer that spread like wildfire through her lungs while he sat helpless in sterile hospital corridors. Emma followed 6 months later, her car sliding off an icy road on her way to visit her mother's grave. The doctor said she died instantly, but Marcus knew better. His daughter had been dying slowly since her mother's funeral, the light fading from her eyes day by day, until there was nothing left to keep her tethered to a world that suddenly felt too cruel to bear. The cabin had been their escape, their weekend retreat, where Emma would chase butterflies through meadows that stretched toward the Yellowstone borderlands. Now it served as his prison, a place where he counted down his remaining days like a man serving a life sentence. The bank's daily calls had become background noise, as meaningless as the wind that rattled the windows each night. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a stranger, hollow cheeks, eyes that had forgotten how to hope, hands that shook from more than just the cold. The half-empty bottle on the nightstand marked time better than any clock, each sip another step toward the oblivion he craved but couldn't quite reach. "Every morning I wake up disappointed that I woke up," he'd told the grief counselor during his last session, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a dying fire. She'd recommended medication, support groups, finding purpose through helping others. He'd chosen isolation instead, wrapping himself in solitude like a burial shroud. The land around him stretched endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful and indifferent to his suffering. Emma used to say the mountains looked like sleeping giants protecting all the creatures that called this wilderness home. Now they felt like tombstones marking the grave of everything he'd ever loved. The wolf pup lay motionless on his porch, her tiny ribcage rising and falling in shallow, desperate breaths. Marcus knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he gently pried the hospital bracelet from between her teeth. The plastic was worn smooth, the printed letters still clearly visible. Emma Thunderheart, age 9, pediatric ward. The same bracelet he'd slipped from his daughter's wrist before they closed the casket. "How is this possible?" he whispered, but the pup's blue eyes, impossibly blue like chips of glacial ice, held no answers, only a pleading that cut through his alcohol-fogged confusion. Blood matted her silver-gray fur, and a strange puncture wound on her neck suggested something far more sinister than a natural death in her family. Marcus scooped her up, surprised by how light she felt, like holding a bundle of twigs wrapped in fur. Inside the cabin, he cleared Emma's old art supplies from the kitchen table and laid the pup down on a towel. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same table where he'd once helped his daughter with biology homework was now serving as a makeshift veterinary station. The pup's breathing grew more labored as Marcus examined her injuries: dehydration, malnutrition, and what looked like an infected bite wound on her left hind leg. His years studying wildlife biology kicked in automatically, muscle memory overriding grief. She needed antibiotics, fluids, and proper medical care, all of which required money he didn't have and a trip to the veterinary clinic 40 miles away. "I should call the wildlife authorities," he said aloud, reaching for his phone. The sensible thing would be to report the injured animal, let the professionals handle it. But as his finger hovered over the dial pad, the pup's eyes fixed on his, and something in that gaze stopped him cold. It was the same look Emma used to give him when she was scared, trusting, desperate, and utterly dependent on him to make everything better. Instead of calling, Marcus found himself rummaging through his medicine cabinet, pulling out antibiotics left over from his last dental procedure. He crushed the pills into powder, mixing them with warm water and honey, then used a syringe to drip the mixture into the pup's mouth. She swallowed weakly, her pink tongue darting out to catch every drop. As he worked, memories crashed over him like waves. Emma, at 7 years old, bringing him a wounded sparrow she'd found in the yard. "Fix him, Daddy. You know about animals." And he had, spending hours fashioning a tiny splint from popsicle sticks and gauze. The bird had flown away 2 weeks later, but Emma's smile had lasted for months. The pup seemed to sense his thoughts. Despite her weakness, she managed to lift her head and nuzzle his palm, the gesture so achingly familiar that Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. Emma used to do the same thing when she was sick, seeking comfort in the simple touch of his hand against her fevered brow. "She begged me for a pet wolf before she died," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Said it would protect me when she couldn't." He'd dismissed it as the fevered ramblings of a child pumped full of morphine, but now, holding this impossible creature in his hands, he wondered if Emma had somehow heard his prayers. The financial reality hit him like a physical blow. The veterinary care this pup needed would cost hundreds of dollars he didn't have, money that should go toward saving the cabin. The foreclosure notice seemed to mock him from across the room, a countdown to homelessness that grew shorter with each passing day. But as he looked into those blue eyes, so eerily similar to Emma's, he knew the choice had already been made. Moving carefully, Marcus carried the pup to Emma's old bedroom, the only room in the cabin he'd left untouched. Her stuffed animal still crowded the twin bed, and her favorite book, a collection of Native American legends about spirit animals, lay open on the nightstand. He placed the pup gently on the comforter, surrounding her with the soft toys that had once comforted his daughter. The pup immediately burrowed into the stuffed wolf Emma had named Luna, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. Marcus stared at the scene, his breath catching in his throat. "Luna," he repeated softly, and the pup's ears twitched in response. That's what she'll call you. That night, Marcus sat vigil beside the bed, watching Luna's labored breathing gradually ease. When she finally fell into a deeper sleep, her tiny paws twitching as if running through dreams, he found himself making a promise he hadn't made since Emma's funeral. I failed her, he whispered into the darkness. I won't fail you. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside Emma's room, surrounded by the ghosts of childhood laughter, something that had been dead for 3 years began to stir back to life. 3 days had passed when the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of an unwelcome visitor. Marcus looked up from where he sat feeding Luna drops of broth, his heart sinking as he recognized the forest green pickup truck pulling into his driveway. Dr. Sarah Whitehorse stepped out, her long black hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, carrying the same leather satchel she'd used during their years working together at Stanford. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone approaching a wounded animal. "I heard you might have found something that belongs in the wild." Marcus instinctively pulled Luna closer to his chest, the pup now alert enough to lift her head and study the newcomer with those startling blue eyes. "How did you know she was here?" Sarah's expression grew troubled as she climbed the porch steps. "Because I've been tracking her family for 3 months. May I come in?" "We need to talk about what you've gotten yourself into." The cabin felt smaller with Sarah's presence filling it, her trained eye taking in the empty bottles, the unpaid bills scattered across the coffee table, the general air of a man barely hanging on. She settled into the chair across from Marcus, her gaze never leaving Luna. "She's beautiful," Sarah said softly, "and incredibly rare. Marcus, do you have any idea what you're holding?" "A wolf pup that needed help," Marcus replied, defensive. "Same as any other injured animal." Sarah shook her head slowly. "This isn't just any wolf pup. Look at her eyes, Marcus. Really look at them." She pulled out a tablet, swiping through photos until she found the one she wanted. "According to genetic testing we've done on her family members, Luna, yes, I know that's what you've named her, carries a bloodline that traces back over 300 years. She's from the last known family of what the Lakota called the spirit wolves." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. His grandmother's stories flooded back, tales of wolves with eyes like winter sky, protectors of the sacred lands, guides for lost souls. "That's just folklore, is it?" Sarah leaned forward. "The DNA analysis shows markers we've never seen before, heightened intelligence, enhanced sensory capabilities, and yes, those blue eyes that appear in less than 1% of wolves worldwide. Marcus, collectors would pay millions for a wolf like this." The word millions hung in the air like a struck bell. Marcus's gaze fell on the foreclosure notice, on the stack of medical bills from Emma's final months, on all the financial wreckage of his former life. $2 million would solve every problem, secure his future, maybe even allow him to honor Sarah and Emma's memory with a proper foundation. But as he looked down at Luna, who had fallen asleep against his chest, her tiny paws kneading his shirt like a contented kitten, the money felt meaningless. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice growing grim. "Luna's mother and father were killed 2 weeks ago. Professional job, tranquilizer darts, surgical precision. We found the mother's body, but the father and 3 other pups are still missing. Someone is systematically hunting this bloodline." Marcus's blood ran cold. The puncture wound on Luna's neck suddenly made terrible sense. She escaped. Barely. And whoever did this will come looking for her. Sarah reached into her satchel and pulled out a series of photographs that made Marcus's stomach lurch. The images showed a beautiful silver wolf lying motionless in the snow, her blue eyes vacant, dark blood staining the white ground around her. "Why are you showing me this?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. "Because you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't some random poaching operation. We're dealing with people who have resources, connections, and absolutely no conscience. They've been tracking this family for months, waiting for the right opportunity. Luna stirred in Marcus's arms, letting out a soft whimper as if sensing the tension in the room. Without thinking, he began stroking her fur, the motion soothing them both. Sarah watched the interaction with keen interest. "She's bonded with you," she observed. "That's remarkable. Wolves this young usually imprint on their pack, not on humans. It's almost like she chose you specifically." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Emma's dying wish echoed in his memory. A wolf sister to protect Daddy when I'm gone. He pushed the thought away, focusing on more practical concerns. "What do you want, Sarah?" "I want to help. There's a breeding program at the conservation center where I work now. Luna would be safe there, protected, and she could help preserve her bloodline. Think about it, Marcus. Instead of hiding here, waiting for killers to find you both, she could be part of something bigger, something that would ensure her species survives." Marcus felt Luna's heartbeat against his palm, steady and strong. The pup had recovered remarkably over the past 3 days, already showing signs of the intelligence Sarah described. She had learned to open simple latches, responded to her name, and seemed to understand far more human speech than any wolf should. "And what happens to me?" Marcus asked. Sarah's expression softened. "You could come too. We need experienced biologists, and you know more about wolf behavior than anyone I've worked with. It would be a fresh start, Marcus. A chance to honor Emma's memory by protecting something precious." The offer was tempting. Safety, purpose, a way to escape the crushing isolation of the cabin. But as Marcus looked around Emma's room, at the drawings on the walls, at the stuffed animals that still held her scent, he felt the familiar weight of loss settling over him. "I need time to think," he said finally. Sarah nodded, standing to leave. "Of course. But Marcus, don't take too long. The people hunting Luna won't wait forever to make their move." As her truck disappeared down the gravel road, Marcus sat in the growing dusk with Luna in his arms. Outside, shadows lengthened across the meadow where Emma used to play, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, mournful, searching, and utterly alone, just like him. The bond between Marcus and Luna deepened with each passing day, creating a rhythm that slowly pulled him back from the edge of despair. Every morning at 5:30, Luna would pad into the kitchen and sit by the coffee maker, waiting patiently as Marcus went through his ritual of grinding beans and measuring water. She had learned his routine with uncanny precision, often anticipating his needs before he recognized them himself. On the 4th morning after Sarah's visit, Marcus woke to find Luna had somehow managed to bring him his blood pressure medication, the small bottle clutched carefully in her teeth. The sight stopped him cold, not just because of her intelligence, but because he'd forgotten to take the pills for 3 days running. His grief had made him careless with his own life, but Luna seemed determined to keep him alive. "How did you know?" he whispered, scratching behind her ears as she dropped the bottle into his palm. Her blue eyes held an awareness that sent shivers down his spine, as if she understood not just his words but the weight of unspoken sorrow they carried. The walks began that same day. Luna, now strong enough to navigate the familiar paths around the cabin, would lead Marcus through the meadows where Emma once chased butterflies. She moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to look back at him with what could only be described as concern when he lagged behind. During these excursions, Marcus found himself talking to her as he once had to Emma, sharing memories and fears he'd kept locked away since the funerals. "Your mom loved this place," he told Luna one afternoon as they sat beside the creek where Sarah used to photograph wildflowers. She said the water sounded like laughter. Emma agreed. She always agreed with her mother about everything. Luna pressed against his leg, a warm weight that somehow made the memories less painful to bear. The financial pressure continued to mount. The bank called twice daily now, their messages growing increasingly urgent. $47,000 might as well have been $47 million for all the hope Marcus had of raising it. He'd sold everything of value years ago to pay for Emma's medical bills, and his professor's pension barely covered basic necessities. The cabin, built on his grandmother's original homestead, represented the last tangible connection to his family's history. Luna seemed to sense his distress during the phone calls. She would position herself between Marcus and the ringing phone, her hackles raised as if the device posed a physical threat. Once, she had even managed to knock the receiver off its cradle, silencing a particularly aggressive collection agent mid-sentence. Marcus couldn't help but smile at her protective instincts. The first sign of real trouble came on a Tuesday evening when Luna's behavior suddenly shifted. She had been playing with Emma's old stuffed wolf when she froze, her ears swiveling toward the front windows. A low growl emerged from her throat, deeper and more menacing than anything Marcus had heard from her before. When he looked outside, he saw nothing but gathering dusk and the familiar silhouettes of pine trees. But Luna remained agitated throughout the night, pacing the cabin's perimeter and whining softly whenever Marcus tried to calm her. By morning, he understood why. Fresh tire tracks marked the soft earth near his mailbox, and several cigarette butts lay scattered in the tall grass, evidence that someone had been watching the cabin while they slept. The paranoia that followed was both rational and consuming. Marcus found himself checking locks multiple times, pulling curtains closed during daylight hours, and jumping at every unfamiliar sound. Luna fed off his anxiety, her own alertness reaching new heights. She began sleeping across the threshold of Emma's room, positioning herself as a living barrier between Marcus and any potential threat. Sarah returned 3 days later, her face grim with news that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. "They're closing in," she said without preamble, settling into the familiar chair across from him. "We've had reports of strangers asking questions in town, showing photos of Luna, professional types with expensive equipment, and no credible story about why they're interested in local wildlife." Luna, now significantly larger and stronger than during Sarah's first visit, approached the conservation scientist with cautious curiosity rather than fear. Sarah extended her hand slowly, allowing the young wolf to investigate her scent before attempting contact. "She's remarkable," Sarah murmured, as Luna permitted a gentle scratch behind the ears. "The intelligence levels we're seeing are unprecedented." "Marcus, in the 2 weeks she's been with you, she's displayed problem-solving abilities that typically take months to develop in captive wolves." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with protective concern. "She's special, but that doesn't mean she belongs in a laboratory." "Not a laboratory," Sarah corrected. "A sanctuary. Marcus, I've spoken with the tribal council about Luna's bloodline. They're willing to grant special protected status to your property if you'll agree to establish a conservation easement. It would mean permanent protection from development and enough funding to maintain the land in perpetuity." The offer was tempting, but Marcus sensed there was more to Sarah's proposal than simple conservation. "What's the catch?" Sarah's expression grew troubled. "The people hunting Luna aren't just collectors. We've identified at least 3 individuals with connections to international wildlife trafficking rings. They're not going to give up easily, and they have resources we can't match. The only way to keep Luna safe long-term is to make her disappearance appear permanent." "You want me to fake her death?" "I want you both to disappear," Sarah said quietly. "There's a facility in Alaska, completely off the grid, where Luna could live as part of a pack while still maintaining her bond with you. You'd be employed as the primary caretaker, with housing and full medical benefits. It's not witness protection exactly, but it serves the same purpose. Marcus looked down at Luna, who had curled up beside his chair with her head resting on his foot. The thought of uprooting her again, of taking her away from the only stable home she'd known, felt like a betrayal. But the alternative, waiting for professional hunters to descend on his isolated cabin, seemed far worse. The decision was postponed when Luna's behavior took another dramatic turn. That evening she began pacing restlessly through the cabin, occasionally stopping to paw at specific locations on the wooden floors. Her agitation was different from the previous night's alertness, more focused, almost purposeful. "What is it, girl?" Marcus asked, following her to the corner of Emma's room where she had begun scratching at the floorboards. The wood was old, original to the cabin's construction in the 1940s, and Luna seemed determined to dig through it. Curiosity overcoming caution, Marcus pried up the loose board Luna had identified. Beneath it lay a small wooden box wrapped in oiled cloth, a container he'd never seen before. Inside, he found a collection of items that made his breath catch. Emma's missing locket, the one they'd searched for frantically during her final hospital stay, several photographs of Luna's mother that could only have been taken recently, and a hand-drawn map showing the location of what appeared to be a cave system deep in the surrounding forest. The implications were staggering. Someone had been in his cabin, had hidden these items beneath Emma's floor, and somehow Luna had known exactly where to find them. The photographs of her mother suggested surveillance that predated the Wolf family's deaths, meaning the killers had been planning their attack for weeks or months. But it was the locket that truly shook Marcus to his core. He opened it with trembling fingers, revealing the tiny photograph inside. Not of Emma, as he'd expected, but of a young Lakota woman he recognized from his grandmother's old albums. The resemblance to both Emma and Luna was unmistakable, the same bright eyes, the same expression of intelligent curiosity. Luna nuzzled his hand as he studied the photograph, her touch gentle but insistent. When he looked into her eyes, he saw something that defied rational explanation, a depth of understanding that seemed to bridge not just species but generations. It was as if she knew the story behind the locket, understood its significance in ways that transcended normal animal cognition. That night, as Luna slept peacefully in Emma's bed for the first time since her arrival, Marcus sat at his kitchen table studying the map. The cave system it depicted was located on sacred Lakota land, in an area his grandmother had always warned him never to explore alone. According to tribal stories, it was a place where the spirits of protective animals gathered to watch over their human families. The rational part of his mind dismissed such thoughts as grief-induced fantasy, but the evidence before him suggested possibilities that challenged everything he thought he knew about the boundaries between the living and the dead, between human and animal consciousness, between the world of facts and the realm of faith. Outside, the night sounds of the forest seemed different, less random, more purposeful. Somewhere in the darkness, Luna's surviving family members might still be alive, waiting for reunion with the sister who had chosen a human protector over the wild freedom of her birth. Marcus made his decision as dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded him of Emma's favorite watercolors. Whatever forces had brought Luna into his life, whatever dangers they faced together, he would not abandon her to the sterile safety of distant sanctuaries or the false security of institutional protection. They would face the coming storm together, bound by mysteries deeper than blood and stronger than fear. The attack came at 3 a.m, announced by Luna's fierce growl cutting through the mountain's silence like a blade. Marcus jolted awake in Emma's room, where he'd taken to sleeping beside Luna's makeshift bed, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting rifle he now kept within arm's reach. Outside, the beam of high-powered flashlights swept across the cabin windows, and the sound of heavy boots crunching through fallen leaves sent ice through his veins. "Marcus Thunderheart!" a voice boomed from the darkness, amplified by a megaphone. "We know you have the wolf. Come out with your hands visible and no one gets hurt." Luna pressed against his leg, her body tense with barely contained aggression. At 4 months old, she had grown considerably, her shoulders now reaching Marcus's knee, but she was still no match for armed men. Through the gap in the curtains, Marcus counted at least 6 figures moving in coordinated formation around his property, their movements suggesting military or law enforcement training. "You have 30 seconds to comply," the voice continued. "After that, we're coming in." Marcus's mind raced through his limited options. The cabin had only 2 exits, both likely covered by the intruders. His truck keys hung by the front door, impossible to reach without exposing himself to gunfire. The landline phone had gone dead sometime during the night, and his cell phone showed no signal, a detail that suggested these weren't random criminals but professionals with jamming equipment. Luna suddenly broke away from his side, padding toward the back of the cabin with purpose. She stopped at the entrance to the old root cellar, a tunnel his grandfather had dug during the Depression to store vegetables through harsh winters. Marcus had forgotten about the passage entirely until Luna's behavior reminded him of its existence. "Smart girl," he whispered, grabbing the emergency bag he'd packed after Sarah's warnings. The tunnel connected to a natural cave system that emerged nearly a quarter-mile away, hidden behind a screen of thick pine trees. If they could reach it without being detected, they might have a chance. The cellar door opened with a squeal of rusted hinges that sounded deafening in the tense silence. Marcus winced, expecting shouts of discovery, but the voices outside continued their countdown without interruption. Luna disappeared into the darkness first, her pale fur quickly swallowed by shadows. Marcus followed, pulling the door closed behind them, just as something heavy crashed against the cabin's front entrance. The tunnel was smaller than he remembered, forcing him to crawl on hands and knees through packed earth that smelled of decades of dampness and decay. Luna moved ahead with confidence, as if she'd traveled this route many times before. Her occasional soft chuffs provided the only guidance in the absolute darkness, leading him through turns and branches he couldn't see. Behind them, the sounds of systematic destruction filtered through the earth. Furniture crashed, glass shattered, and angry voices shouted commands as the intruders discovered their quarry had vanished. Marcus pressed forward, his knees screaming against the rocky ground, driven by the knowledge that Luna's life depended on their escape. The cave opening appeared as a faint gray rectangle against the blackness, barely wide enough for Marcus's shoulders. He emerged gasping into the pre-dawn air, his clothes torn and muddy, Luna already standing guard beside a towering pine tree. The cabin was visible in the distance, ablaze with artificial light as dark figures continued their search. "We need to keep moving," Marcus whispered, though his lungs burned from the crawl through the tunnel. Luna seemed to understand, immediately trotting deeper into the forest along what appeared to be a game trail. Her night vision was far superior to his, and Marcus found himself stumbling over roots and low branches while she moved with silent grace. They had traveled perhaps a mile when Luna suddenly froze, her ears swiveling toward a sound Marcus couldn't detect. Seconds later, he heard it too, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors growing steadily louder. Spotlights began sweeping the forest canopy, and Marcus realized with growing horror that their pursuers had anticipated the possibility of escape. Luna bolted toward a cluster of massive boulders that formed a natural shelter, Marcus scrambling to keep up. They pressed themselves into the deepest shadow just as the helicopter passed overhead, its searchlight turning night into harsh day for terrifying moments. The aircraft circled twice before moving on, but Marcus knew it would return. "Who are these people?" he gasped, his heart hammering against his ribs. Luna whined softly, nuzzling his hand in a gesture of comfort that reminded him achingly of Emma's attempts to soothe his fears during thunderstorms. The answer came with the sunrise, when Sarah's voice called softly from the edge of their hiding place. "Marcus, it's me. You can come out. They're gone for now." Marcus emerged cautiously, keeping Luna close to his side. Sarah looked haggard, her usually neat hair disheveled and her clothes bearing dirt stains that suggested she'd been moving through the forest for hours. "Vincent Blackstone," she said without preamble. "That's who's hunting Luna. He's not just a collector, he's a former park ranger turned professional poacher. Marcus, this man has connections to international trafficking rings worth millions of dollars. He's not going to give up." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but Sarah's expression suggested a personal history that went beyond professional concern. "You know him." "He's my brother," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vincent lost his son 5 years ago in what he believed was a wolf attack. It twisted something inside him, turned his love for wildlife into an obsession with revenge. He's been systematically hunting wolves across 3 states, selling the rare ones to private collectors and killing the rest." Marcus felt Luna tense against his leg as if she understood the implications of Sarah's revelation. "His son? What really happened?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Tommy was 8 years old, my nephew. He wandered away from camp during a family trip to Glacier National Park. When we found him 3 days later, he was at the bottom of a ravine with injuries that Vincent convinced himself came from wolf bites. But the medical examiner found evidence of a fall. Tommy had been trying to rescue a trapped wolf pup when he slipped and fell." The tragic irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Vincent's son had died trying to save a wolf, but grief had transformed that heroic act into a narrative of victimization that justified years of systematic slaughter. "Vincent believes he's preventing other children from suffering Tommy's fate," Sarah continued. "In his mind, every wolf he kills is a life saved. The fact that he's making millions from rare specimens is just a convenient bonus." Luna, suddenly alert, her head swiveling toward a distant sound that made Marcus's blood run cold. Vehicle engines, multiple units, approaching from different directions. Their hiding place had been discovered, or soon would be. "There's a place," Sarah said urgently, pulling out the hand-drawn map Marcus had found beneath Emma's floorboards. "These caves your grandmother told stories about. They're real, and they're connected to a network that runs for miles underground. Vincent doesn't know about them because they're not on any official surveys." Marcus studied the map, recognizing landmarks from his childhood explorations. The cave system was located on sacred Lakota land, protected by tribal law from outside interference. If they could reach it, they might find temporary sanctuary. "What about you?" Marcus asked as Luna began moving toward the trail indicated on the map. "I'm going to try to reason with him," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Vincent is still my brother, somewhere under all that pain and anger. Maybe if I can make him remember who Tommy really was, who he would have grown up to be." The sound of engines grew closer, and Marcus knew their time for goodbyes had run out. Luna was already disappearing into the undergrowth, following an instinct that seemed to guide her toward safety with uncanny precision. Marcus took one last look at Sarah, memorizing her face in case they never met again. "If something happens to me," he said, "tell the world about Luna. Tell them what Vincent is doing to her family." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Take care of each other. And Marcus. Your grandmother's stories about spirit wolves. Maybe they were more than just folklore after all. As Marcus plunged into the forest after Luna, following a path that seemed to materialize beneath their feet, he could hear the distant sound of vehicles converging on their former hiding place. Behind them lay everything he'd ever known: his home, his memories, his connection to the world of ordinary human concerns. Ahead lay only wilderness and uncertainty, guided by a wolf whose blue eyes held secrets he was only beginning to understand. But for the first time since Emma's death, Marcus felt truly alive, his heart pounding with purpose rather than despair. Whatever awaited them in the sacred caves, they would face it together. The sacred caves revealed themselves gradually through the morning mist, their entrance hidden behind a curtain of ancient pine trees whose roots had grown around stone formations carved by centuries of wind and water. Luna approached the threshold with reverence, her steps slowing as if she recognized the spiritual significance of this place. The air itself felt different here, thicker, weighted with the accumulated prayers and ceremonies of countless generations. Marcus followed Luna into the cave system, his flashlight beam revealing walls adorned with petroglyphs that made his breath catch. The images depicted wolves running alongside human figures, their forms intertwined in scenes of hunting, protection, and spiritual communion. His grandmother's stories flooded back. Tales of the first treaties between the Lakota people and the wolf clans, agreements forged in these very caverns. The deeper they ventured, the more Luna's behavior shifted. She moved with increasing confidence, as if following a path mapped in her genetic memory. Her soft chuffs echoed off the stone walls, and Marcus began to realize she wasn't simply making random sounds. The calls followed a pattern, a rhythm that seemed to carry meaning beyond his understanding. Then, from the darkness ahead, came an answering call. Marcus's flashlight beam found them in a natural amphitheater carved from living rock. 3 wolf pups, slightly larger than Luna, their eyes reflecting the light like blue stars. They were thin, clearly struggling to survive on their own, but alive against all odds. Luna bounded toward them with joy that transcended species, her reunion with her siblings a celebration of survival against impossible circumstances. "My God," Marcus whispered, sinking to his knees as the 4 young wolves tumbled together in a display of pure happiness. "You led me to them. You knew they were here all along." The reunion was brief. Luna suddenly stiffened, her ears swiveling toward the cave entrance. The others followed suit, their playful demeanor instantly replaced by alert wariness. From outside came the sound Marcus had been dreading, the systematic approach of Vincent Blackstone and his team. Sarah must have told him about the caves, Marcus realized, his heart sinking. His only advantage had been secrecy, and now even that was gone. The cave system, for all its spiritual protection, had become a trap with only one exit. Luna positioned herself between Marcus and the entrance, her siblings flanking her in formation that spoke of pack intelligence developed through necessity. At 4 months old, they should have been dependent on adult protection, but survival had accelerated their maturation in ways that defied normal wolf development. Vincent's voice echoed through the cavern, distorted by stone but unmistakably commanding. "Dr. Thunderheart, I know you're in there. I'm not an unreasonable man. Surrender the wolves and you can walk away from this with your life and enough money to solve all your financial problems." Marcus found his voice, though it trembled with rage and fear. These aren't commodities to be bought and sold. They're living beings with families, with the right to exist free from your vendetta. My vendetta. Vincent's laugh was bitter, echoing off the cave walls like the sound of breaking glass. "You think this is about revenge? Dr. Thunderheart, I'm preventing future tragedies. Every wolf I remove from the wild is one less threat to innocent children." The 4 wolf pups pressed closer to Marcus, their body heat providing comfort in the growing cold of the cave. Luna's blue eyes never left the entrance, her young body coiled with protective tension that broke Marcus's heart. She was still a baby, forced into the role of defender by circumstances beyond her control. "Your son died trying to save a wolf," Marcus called back, his voice gaining strength. "Sarah told me the truth. Tommy was a hero, not a victim. Would he want you to honor his memory by destroying the very creatures he died protecting?" The silence that followed was deafening. When Vincent spoke again, his voice carried a raw pain that made Marcus flinch. "You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. You didn't see what they did to him." "No, but I've lost a child too," Marcus replied, his own voice breaking. "My daughter Emma died 3 years ago, and for a long time I thought dying with her was the only way to honor her memory. But grief isn't meant to destroy the things our children loved. It's meant to preserve them." Luna whined softly, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. She approached Marcus slowly, pressing her muzzle into his palm in a gesture of comfort that reminded him achingly of Emma's last conscious moments in the hospital. The touch steadied him, filled him with a resolve he hadn't felt since his daughter's funeral. "Emma wanted a wolf sister to protect me when she was gone," Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly through the cavern. "Luna found me the same day Emma died 3 years ago. She was carrying Emma's hospital bracelet, Vincent. Explain that coincidence to me. Explain how a wild animal could know to seek out the one person who needed her most." The sound of footsteps grew closer, and Marcus knew Vincent was approaching the main chamber. There was nowhere left to run, no clever escape routes or hidden passages. The sacred cave had become their final stand, a place where truth would either triumph or be buried forever. Luna moved away from Marcus, positioning herself at the center of the chamber with her siblings. The 4 young wolves formed a defensive circle, their eyes reflecting Marcus's flashlight beam like a constellation of blue stars. They were small, vulnerable, hopelessly outmatched by armed men, but their courage was absolute. Vincent appeared at the chamber entrance, his silhouette backlit by powerful flashlights held by his team. He was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps 45, with the weathered features of someone who spent his life outdoors. His eyes held the hollow look of a man who had lost everything that mattered and spent years trying to fill the void with vengeance. "Stand down," Vincent ordered his men, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Lower your weapons." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Sarah's words had reached something human in her brother, some remnant of the man who had once dedicated his life to protecting wildlife. Vincent stepped into the chamber alone, his gaze fixed on the 4 wolf pups. When he saw Luna's blue eyes, his breath caught audibly. "My God, she looks exactly like the wolf Tommy died trying to save," Marcus finished quietly. "Sarah showed me the photos from the medical examiner's report. The pup had blue eyes just like these. Your son died a hero, Vincent. Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless." Vincent's face contorted with pain so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. He dropped to his knees in the center of the chamber, his carefully constructed justifications crumbling like ancient stone. Tommy loved wolves. He had pictures of them all over his bedroom walls. When he saw that pup trapped in the ravine, he didn't hesitate. He never hesitated when something needed help. Luna approached Vincent slowly, her instincts apparently telling her that this broken man posed no immediate threat. She sniffed his outstretched hand, then sat back on her haunches, studying his face with those impossibly wise blue eyes. "They're beautiful," Vincent whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Tommy would have loved them. But even as hope bloomed in Marcus's chest, he heard the sound that shattered everything, the metallic click of a rifle bolt sliding home, operated by one of Vincent's men who had grown impatient with his employer's moment of weakness. "Enough of this," the man snarled. "We came here to do a job." The gunshot shattered the sacred silence of the cave, its echo reverberating off ancient stone walls like the cry of a wounded spirit. Marcus watched in horror as Luna crumpled to the cave floor, her silver fur quickly darkening with blood from the rifle wound in her chest. The blue eyes that had held such wisdom and love now stared unseeing at the petroglyphs above, their light fading like extinguished stars. "No!" Vincent's anguished cry mixed with Marcus's own as both men lunged toward the fallen wolf pup. The shooter, a cold-eyed mercenary named Drake who had grown tired of Vincent's hesitation, kept his rifle trained on the remaining 3 wolves as they huddled around their sister's motionless form. Marcus gathered Luna's limp body in his arms, her weight somehow both heavier and lighter than it should have been. Her breathing was shallow, each breath a struggle that sent pink foam bubbling from her muzzle. The wound was high in her chest, possibly missing her heart by mere inches, but in the depths of a cave miles from veterinary care, even a survivable injury could prove fatal. "What have you done?" Vincent screamed at Drake, his grief transforming into rage. "She was just a baby!" Drake's expression remained impassive. "She was the target. The others are bonus, but this one was worth $2 million alone. Dead or alive, the buyer doesn't care. He just wants those blue eyes for his collection." The casual brutality of the statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. He pressed Luna closer to his chest, feeling her heartbeat growing weaker against his ribs. Her siblings whimpered softly, pressing against Marcus's legs as if seeking comfort from the only adult they trusted. "She's dying," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "She's dying. And for what? Money? Some sick collector's trophy room?" Vincent's face had gone white with shock and recognition. "Tommy," he breathed. This is exactly how Tommy must have felt, watching that pup suffer in the trap. "This is what I've become, the very thing my son died fighting against." Drake raised his rifle toward the remaining wolves, but Vincent moved with surprising speed for a man his size. The 2 men collided in a tangle of limbs, wrestling for control of the weapon as it discharged harmlessly into the cave ceiling, sending fragments of stone raining down on them all. Marcus used the distraction to examine Luna's wound more closely. The bullet had entered high on her left side, and while there was significant bleeding, her breathing suggested the lung hadn't been completely punctured. If he could stop the bleeding and get her to a veterinarian within the next few hours, she might survive. But they were trapped in a cave system miles from the nearest road, surrounded by armed men who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. Even if Vincent had experienced a change of heart, his employees were still following their original orders. Luna's eyes fluttered open, finding Marcus's face with an effort that spoke to her incredible will to live. Her gaze held the same trust she'd shown that first night on his porch, the absolute faith of a creature who believed in the goodness of the man who had chosen to protect her. "I'm here," Marcus whispered against her fur. "I'm not going anywhere. Emma sent you to me, and I won't let you down." The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of more of Vincent's team. Drake had managed to separate himself from Vincent and was calling for backup, his voice echoing through the chamber with cold efficiency. Within minutes, they would be overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. But as Marcus held Luna's failing form, something extraordinary happened. The 3 remaining wolf pups began to howl, not the high-pitched yips of juveniles, but deep, haunting calls that seemed to resonate through the very bones of the earth. The sound was picked up and amplified by the cave's acoustics, transformed into something that raised the hair on Marcus's arms. From somewhere deep in the cave system came answering calls, then more and more. Vincent's eyes widened with recognition and growing fear. "That's impossible. The pack was wiped out. We confirmed the kills." But the howling continued to build, echoing from passages that Marcus hadn't known existed. Luna's siblings had somehow called to wolves that shouldn't have been there, summoning help from creatures that had either escaped Vincent's previous hunts or been drawn to this sacred place by instincts older than human understanding. Drake and his men shifted nervously, their weapons trained on cave entrances that seemed to multiply in the shifting shadows cast by their flashlights. The professional confidence they had displayed earlier began to crack as the howling intensified, creating an otherworldly symphony that spoke of wildness and fury. "We need to leave," one of Drake's men said, his voice tight with fear. "Now!" But it was too late. The first adult wolf appeared at the main entrance, a magnificent gray male whose size dwarfed the pups Marcus was protecting. His golden eyes surveyed the scene with intelligence that seemed almost human, taking in the wounded Luna, the cowering humans, and the guns pointed in his direction. He was followed by others, a black female with silver markings, a brown male missing part of his left ear, a pack that should have been extinct but had somehow survived Vincent's systematic hunting. They moved with the coordinated precision of apex predators who had learned to fear and hate humans with very good reason. "Oh God," Vincent breathed, recognition dawning in his eyes. "These aren't random wolves. They're the survivors. And the ones who escaped my traps, whose families I destroyed. They've been waiting for this moment." The lead male stepped forward, his attention focused entirely on Luna's still form in Marcus's arms. For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought the wolf might see him as a threat to be eliminated, but instead the animal approached slowly, his massive head lowering to gently sniff Luna's wound. What happened next defied every scientific principle Marcus thought he understood about wolf behavior. The adult wolves formed a protective circle around Marcus and the pups, their bodies creating a living barrier between the humans and Drake's increasingly panicked team. They showed no aggression toward Marcus himself, seeming to recognize him as Luna's chosen protector. Luna stirred in Marcus's arms, her eyes opening at the scent of her own kind. She managed a weak whine, a sound that was answered by gentle chuffs from the adult wolves. The reunion was both heartbreaking and beautiful, a family that had been scattered by violence coming together in the place their ancestors considered most sacred. "They're not going to let us leave," Drake said, his voice edged with panic. "They're waiting for us to make a move so they can tear us apart." Vincent stared at the wolves surrounding them, his face a mask of complex emotions. "This is justice," he said quietly. "This is exactly what Tommy would have wanted. The wolves protecting each other, protecting the innocent." But Drake wasn't interested in poetic justice. He raised his rifle toward the lead male, finger tightening on the trigger. "I didn't come this far to be intimidated by a bunch of mangy—" The shot never came. Sarah Whitehorse appeared behind Drake like a ghost, pressing a tranquilizer gun against his neck and pulling the trigger before he could complete his threat. The mercenary collapsed instantly, his rifle clattering across the stone floor. "FBI," Sarah announced to the remaining men, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. "You're all under arrest for violation of the Endangered Species Act, conspiracy to commit wildlife trafficking, and about a dozen other federal crimes I'll think of while we're processing you." Marcus looked up at her in shock. "FBI?" "Wildlife Crime Division," Sarah explained, keeping her tranquilizer gun trained on Drake's associates. "I've been building a case against Vincent's operation for 2 years. When he went after Luna, I knew it was time to act." Vincent stared at his sister with a mixture of betrayal and dawning understanding. "You set me up." "I tried to save you," Sarah replied sadly. "I gave you every chance to walk away, to remember who you used to be before grief poisoned everything good in your heart." "Tommy's death was a tragedy, Vincent, but what you've done since then is unforgivable." As federal agents began filing into the cave called by Sarah's emergency signal, Marcus felt Luna's breathing grow stronger against his chest. The adult wolves maintained their protective formation, but their tension had decreased now that the immediate threat had passed. Luna's blue eyes found Marcus's face once more, and this time he saw not just trust but gratitude, the recognition of a debt that went beyond simple rescue to something approaching love. "We're going to get you help," Marcus promised her, "and this time, no one will ever hurt your family again." 1 year later, Marcus Thunderheart stood at the edge of the meadow where Emma used to chase butterflies, watching Luna teach her own pups the ancient art of hunting field mice. The scar on her chest had healed to a thin silver line barely visible beneath her thick winter coat, but the wisdom in her blue eyes spoke of trials that had aged her beyond her 2 years. The Sacred Wolf Sanctuary, as the federal government had officially designated his property, sprawled across 300 acres of protected Lakota land. The funding had come through a combination of federal conservation grants, tribal council support, and an unexpected source: Vincent Blackstone's seized assets, liquidated and donated to wildlife conservation as part of his plea agreement. Vincent himself sat on a bench near the sanctuary's visitor center, sketching Luna's pups with the careful attention of someone trying to memorize every detail. His transformation had been as remarkable as it was painful to witness. The 2 years of court-mandated therapy, combined with community service at wildlife rehabilitation centers, had slowly excavated the man he'd been before grief transformed him into something unrecognizable. "She's teaching them about patience," Vincent observed as Marcus approached. His voice carried none of the bitter edge that had characterized their first meeting in the cave. "Tommy used to do the same thing with injured birds. Show them how to hunt again, how to trust their instincts." Marcus settled beside him on the bench, comfortable now with the silence that had replaced the hostility between them. Vincent's presence at the sanctuary had been controversial at first, but his genuine remorse and extensive knowledge of wolf behavior had proven invaluable. More importantly, Luna had accepted him, seeming to understand that grief rather than evil had driven his actions. "The oldest pup is showing signs of the blue-eyed gene," Marcus said, pointing to Luna's daughter, who was stalking a grasshopper with intense concentration. "Dr. Whitehorse thinks we might be looking at the first generation of a fully recovered bloodline." Sarah emerged from the research cabin, her arms full of paperwork that documented the sanctuary's remarkable success. The adult wolves who had appeared in the cave that day had established a thriving pack on the protected land, producing offspring and attracting lone wolves from across the region. What had started as a desperate rescue mission had evolved into a cornerstone of regional wolf conservation. "The university wants to establish a permanent research station here," Sarah announced, settling into the grass beside the bench. "Full funding for at least 10 years, with Marcus as the primary coordinator. It would mean year-round staff, graduate student programs, and enough resources to expand the sanctuary to include other endangered species." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, not the crushing weight of grief that had defined his existence for so long, but the nervous excitement of new possibilities. The sanctuary had already given him purpose beyond survival, but the proposed expansion would create something Emma would have loved, a place where children could learn to understand and respect the wild creatures she'd been so fascinated by. Luna's pups bounded toward them, their playful tumbling bringing laughter that echoed across the meadow. The oldest, the one with the promising blue eyes, separated herself from her siblings and approached Marcus with the same trust Luna had shown as a wounded infant. She pressed her small muzzle into his palm, and Marcus felt the familiar surge of protective love that had defined his relationship with her mother. "What will you call her?" Vincent asked, his pencil capturing the pup's delicate features with surprising skill. Marcus considered the question, watching the young wolf's intelligent gaze. "Hope?" he said finally. "Her name is Hope." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. A year ago, hope had seemed like a foreign concept, something that belonged to other people living other lives. Now it surrounded them in the form of playing wolf pups, growing trees, and the knowledge that their actions had preserved something precious for future generations. As evening settled over the sanctuary, Marcus made his way to the small cemetery where Emma and Sarah lay buried beneath matching headstones. Luna followed, as she did every evening, settling beside Emma's grave with the patience of a devoted daughter. The ritual had developed naturally over the months, a daily acknowledgement of the love that had brought them together. "She would have been so proud of this place," Marcus said, running his fingers along Emma's headstone. "All those nights she begged for a pet wolf, and now we have an entire pack." Luna's soft whine carried agreement and comfort in equal measure. She had grown into a magnificent animal, her silver coat gleaming in the sunset, her blue eyes holding depths of understanding that continued to amaze visitors and researchers alike. The bond between them had only strengthened with time, evolving from desperate mutual need into something approaching the parent-child relationship Emma had envisioned. The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Maria Santos, the sanctuary's newest addition. A recent graduate in wildlife biology with a specialization in wolf communication, she had been studying Luna's pack for 3 months and making discoveries that challenged conventional understanding of wolf intelligence and social structure. "The pack is exhibiting behaviors I've never seen documented," Maria reported, her excitement evident despite her attempt at scientific objectivity. "They're teaching the pups hunting techniques that typically aren't learned until much later in development. It's as if they're accelerating their education, preparing them for challenges that most wolves never face." Marcus nodded, unsurprised by the observation. Luna's pack had been forged by trauma and survival, their intelligence honed by circumstances that would have destroyed weaker animals. The pups were inheriting not just genes but accumulated wisdom, passed down through generations of wolves who had learned to coexist with humans while maintaining their wild nature. As the stars appeared overhead, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The broken man who had contemplated joining his family in death had been replaced by someone with purpose, responsibility, and the kind of deep satisfaction that came from nurturing life rather than merely enduring it. The financial security provided by the sanctuary's federal funding had resolved the practical concerns that once dominated his thoughts, but more importantly, it had given him a reason to wake up each morning. The wolves depended on him, the researchers valued his expertise, and visitors left with a deeper appreciation for the wild world that existed beyond their urban experiences. Vincent appeared at the cemetery's edge, maintaining a respectful distance. His evening visits had become routine, a chance to pay respects to the animals he had killed and to seek some measure of peace with the man he had been. The conversations between them had evolved from stilted apologies to genuine discussions about conservation, redemption, and the complex relationship between humans and the natural world. "The federal prosecutor called today," Vincent said quietly. "The last of my associates took a plea deal. The trafficking ring is completely dismantled." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. The investigation triggered by Luna's rescue had uncovered an international network responsible for the deaths of hundreds of endangered animals. The convictions and sentences had sent a clear message to others involved in similar crimes, while the seized assets had funded conservation efforts across multiple states. Luna stirred from her vigil beside Emma's grave, approaching Vincent with the cautious acceptance she had shown since his transformation began. She allowed him to scratch behind her ears, a gesture of forgiveness that spoke to her remarkable capacity for understanding human nature. "Tommy would have loved this place," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. "He would have spent every summer here learning about wolf behavior, helping with the research. In a way, I think he'd be proud that his death led to something this important." As they walked back toward the sanctuary buildings, Luna's pack emerged from the forest to begin their nightly patrol. The adult wolves moved with the confidence of animals who knew they were protected, their pups following in formation that spoke to generations of inherited wisdom. The sight never failed to fill Marcus with wonder at the resilience of wild creatures and the possibility of redemption for those willing to seek it. Inside the cabin that had once echoed with loneliness, Marcus prepared for sleep surrounded by the sounds of life. Outside his window, Luna settled onto the porch where she had first collapsed as a wounded pup, now the matriarch of a thriving pack and the guardian of a sanctuary that honored both the living and the dead. The last thing Marcus saw before closing his eyes was Emma's photograph on his nightstand, her smile somehow brighter in the moonlight that filtered through the windows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new reasons to believe in the power of love to transform even the deepest grief into something beautiful and lasting. The wolves were home, and so was he. Sometimes life breaks us so completely that we can't imagine ever feeling whole again. Marcus Thunderheart lost everything that mattered: his beloved wife Sarah, his precious daughter Emma, his career, his home, his reason to wake up each morning. At 52, he was drowning in grief, counting down his final days in a cabin that felt more like a tomb than a home. But then Luna appeared, a wounded wolf pup carrying his daughter's hospital bracelet, and everything changed. This isn't just a story about a man and a wolf. It's about finding family in the most unexpected places, about how love transcends death, and how sometimes our greatest purpose emerges from our deepest pain. Marcus discovered that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means transforming our loss into something beautiful that honors those we've loved. The Sacred Wolf Sanctuary became his legacy, Emma's living memorial, and proof that even in our darkest hours, hope can find us. Your pain is valid, your grief is real, but your story isn't over. Like Marcus, you might be one broken heart away from discovering your greatest purpose. Share with us. Have you ever found unexpected healing through helping others or connecting with animals? What gave you hope when you thought all was lost?